Hello, I'm Charlotte Nash and I am a CDA Collaborative Doctoral Awards student at Kent University and the British Museum. And I'm just going into my second year now of my PhD, which is all about the dissemination of glass bangles across the Indian Ocean Trade Network. And today I'm focusing specifically on the how they might be used in interpretation to understand a bit more about the economy, society, and personal identity. So this is just one aspect of the study, and I should probably also note that my study is actually 13th to 18th century Common Era, so it's quite a big scope and goes a bit beyond the Middle Ages. So my research aims and objectives are quite wide. As I said, there's quite a few elements to this. I'm not going to talk about all of it, but I did recently speak at a conference about the PhD as a whole and how far along I've got with a lot of the methodological and analytical elements. If you're interested in that, that's on my YouTube channel, and it is linked to my ResearchGate and academia pages, which I shall give out at the end. And additionally, another huge area that I am not talking about today is all about the scientific analysis of the glass recipes in these different bangles to help identify the provenance of their primary production. Again, I am talking at a conference about that next week, and I hope to record it and also add that to my YouTube channel. So again, if you want to keep up to date with other aspects, please follow me on those. So once I have created a typology of my core collection, which is the CIRAF collection at the British Museum, and for anyone who doesn't know, CIRAF is a trade hub on the coast of the Iranian coast in the Gulf region. It was at its height during the 9th century, and I'm using this collection to obviously study glass bangles, but also create a typology, a master typology for all known and future bangles to go into. Now, a typology is used as a reference guide. So it's like a catalogue of different stylistic changes of a particular artifact that can be associated with a different period or place. So really useful when trying to know more about objects in a museum that have no context, or surface finds that have no real archaeological context, or on the flip of that, if you find one and you have no other indicator on the date of the stratigraphy that you're looking at in a site, in a layer, then that can help you date the layer and other objects. So this should be useful. And then to also create, see if there are links between the different styles and the glass chemical recipes to identify provenance. And then hopefully from that visually demonstrate the distribution and spread across time and place of these different bangles. So it's quite ambitious. Now, once all that's done, what I really hope to do is try and see whether this reflects any other changes in the social, economic, political, or other cultural aspects. And that's what this talk today is about, on the potential of these moving objects to understand more about cultural changes and identity, and I think also potentially female identity. So here's a map that I made. It's all about published reports on glass bangles, or the mention of glass bangles within other, say, site reports and things like that that I know of. It's not fully extensive yet, but it gives you an idea that there are generally 5 regions of studies, but also glass production, primary or secondary production sites that do roughly correlate with different styles. And as you can see, the Western regions, particularly the Levant, is very overrepresented, as is the case in archaeology with everything. The Levant has been heavily excavated across time, versus very sparsely represented regions of South Asia and also the Gulf region. I've actually added a few extra ones to the Gulf region that aren't yet published and things, just because I hope to look at them. So actually there's fewer than you see on my map. And you can see there's Siraf in bold. But what I'm really glad to say is that there are some forthcoming and recently done studies on South Asia glass and glass bangles that I think are really exciting and going to flesh out a bit more about that region as well, which I hope to use to better contextualize what I'm looking at in the Gulf. So Siraf will be my core site, but I hope to look at other collections in the region as well to better understand this region. And something I really quickly want to say about Siraf is, as I'd mentioned earlier, it was a big trading site in the 9th century. And in my abstract, I mentioned about the core archaeological principle of moving objects being used to represent economic trade networks, particularly portable luxury goods, or the movement of people, particularly utilitarian objects, utility objects, functional objects, such as cooking pots and things like that. If they're found in different regions, it can often indicate that there's a migration of different people. And those are the two core uses and principles behind moving objects and their interpretation. But I should mention that there are other ways that objects end up moving around, and there are other value systems that motivate this, and this is often overlooked. And I certainly expected to find that my bangles would represent other trade goods, would be representative of other trade goods and be across the Indian Ocean and be found in quantity around the sort of 8th and 9th centuries, potentially. However, that's not the case. They are dating from post 11th century, when the site had gone into decline and retracted, economic decline, I should say, and detracted it back into a rural village. And so wasn't really seeing any trade goods coming through from the Indian Ocean anymore. So that's unusual. But it did make me think of a previous study that someone had undertaken on other collections, where they did suggest that they weren't necessarily following regular trade patterns, and that they presented an idea that perhaps it's pilgrims moving these around and buying them as souvenirs, as you get with coffee cups from Medina, Mecca. Now, for their site, I can see why they thought that, potentially, because it is a big pilgrimage route. But generally speaking, looking at the whole region, that doesn't seem to be the case. But what's really interesting about the observation is to think beyond your traditional values of trade and people who are trading objects or moving objects around, and why. And this is what I'm starting to think about with my collection now. So yes, there are other intangible motivations for trade that we see to do with cultural values, and certainly in neighbouring South Asia, glass bangles are still a really important part of female identity, particularly marriage bangles. And you can see here, this is an 18th century print from the V&A showing a specialist glass bangle trader. And I thought this was quite interesting because there has been a preliminary study on the glass from Siraf by Caroline Swan in 2017 with a few others, who looked at the provenance of glass from Siraf, primarily the vessels, but also a small collection of the bangles comparatively, and found that the majority of the glass was made locally, as was expected, with some imported regionally. And then there were a few very small amount of others. And within that, all the bangles were the others. And they seem to be of different glasses, so representing different regions potentially and different workshops. And that's interesting because it means that they are probably produced at specialist workshops in the way that you still see in South Asia today, specialist glass bangle makers, craftspeople. and potentially specialist traders, which may be why you're getting them not follow the same trade routes as everything else, and why you're seeing them at a site where they're not going to be potentially onward traded, but they are being sold to the locals because it doesn't matter how whether it's a trade hub or not, women want them. So that's just an idea at this point, very early stages. But this is just a sort of snapshot of how my typology is going at the moment. Now, I must say that although I've catalogued everything into a type now and I've created a typology, I haven't done a full data sheet on everything yet. I'm only about 60% of the way through. So this is very much working in progress. But you can see here the idea, and that I will hopefully fill in period and provenance as I go. Something to note though that I think is really important are the cross sections, and you see there it says cross section and sketch, and you see circular and what I've called peaked, domed, like a flat. Now those with a flat bottom, whether it's peaked, domed or flat, are produced with a different manufacturing technique to the circular ones, and I think that's really significant because I think it represents a different period of production. So I'll talk about that in a minute, but that's very intriguing. And also you can see that a good 65% are type B, which are the twisted variety, and 33% are the plain variety, and then everything else is just the others. Twisted, I think you have to have a circular cross section to create a twisted, or you get a circular cross section when you create a twisted. So I do think this is an earlier technique and style, and certainly from the much later sites I have seen, you don't seem to get them. So I do think this might be regionally and time specific. And there are lots of other interesting ones that popped up. Most of them I haven't catalogued yet, so there are a few more than this, but sorry, I haven't done them yet. But what kind of information we can extract archaeologically that can tell us more about culture and individuals is really interesting. So I was just looking, for example, at the circumference of these, and just to give you kind of context on this. So this is the part of the hand that has to fit. So something too wide would fall off as a bangle, but something too tight wouldn't fit, obviously. So mine is 7 inches. My partner's, who's a male, who's 6 foot, so a rather large male, his is 9. So I'm not saying that we represent everybody ever across time, and obviously I'd like to look at skeletal evidence to get an idea of female versus male average size wrists. But just to start thinking about this, I can see here that the majority of what I've got is between 5 and 7 inches, so would barely fit me. This indicates that they are probably primarily worn by women and children. And that does correlate with what the excavator noted, David Whitehouse, in the 60s, that he thought they looked very similar to those that he'd observed local women and children wearing in the villages. So even in the 60s, apparently, it was still part of a local cultural tradition. So that's interesting on who might be wearing these. Also interesting to note that type B, which I believe to be generally an earlier type at this point, tend to be slightly wider. So perhaps it was a male and female adornment that later became associated with females. I don't know. Worth thinking about though. And then things that I'm thinking about to do with who made these. So the twisted variety, 85% are right twist and 15% are left twist. And twisting direction, I think, is predicated by if you're left-handed or right-handed, because the wrist naturally twists out one way easier than another, hence why door handles and tools are usually made to twist in a certain direction that favours right-handed people, because it is believed that there are more right-handed people than left in the world. That is an assumption. So this might be indicative of that, if that holds true. And then just what I was talking about before about the manufacturing techniques used. So there is no imagery that I know of someone making a bangle in the first technique of twisting canes together and using tools to create a seam and then sort of spinning them out. This is the closest I found, and I didn't make that clear in my last presentation, that this is not someone handling with their bare hands molten glass. This is lacquer, or sometimes called lac, which is a modern cold working technique. But I think the principle is fairly similar, and so it's a good visual cue for how the earlier ones may have been made and how much more skill is needed and time intensive, even for the very plain ones, versus a technique that I think came in a bit later and ran alongside for a while at different workshops, which you take a piece of molten glass out of the furnace, you sort of give it a bit of a twist with your poker to create sort of a donut shape, and you drop it onto these cone shapes that are then spun out like spinning tops that spins out the hot glass into the size bangle you want. So it's quicker to do, it's easier then to do a lot of decorative stuff with it. It's seamless, comparatively seamless, it's completely seamless, and it's a bit more mass produced. And then finally, the modern way of doing it, which is not fully mechanical, but again, much more mass produced. And you can see I've called it the coil type, and this I think came in around the 19th century and is also still practiced in South Asia, where you get a bit of molten glass and you pull out a trail of that, and then you attach it to a metallic rod, or I guess you call it like a tube or pipe, and that twists really fast, and what you get is a coil of very fine glass that's very uniform, like a spring, and then it cools, and then it's cut, as you can see in this image, usually with a diamond cutter or something similar, and they spring down to create these perfect bangles that have tiny little breaks in them. These are then heated over candles or fire by women to create what appears to be seamless, but actually, if you hold up to the light, is slightly seamed bangles. So that's modern. I've got at least 3 of those, and they're very obvious in my opinion. And also, I visually identified them as modern, probably intrusive surface finds. But the scientific analysis also indicated that they were based on trace elements that you don't find in historic glass. So that's good to know. And then something that I haven't started yet that I'd love to get to if I can, and if not, maybe for a postdoctorate, is to do a similar cataloguing of colours and create a coding system based on 3D Pantone codes, so that they can be assigned with precise colours, because describing colours is impossible, and most imagery is not printed in colour, so you've got no idea. And I think colour is really important to culture, cultural meaning, and I think potentially identifying whether there are patterns of change in colour across time and place, and also links potentially with certain styles or glass recipes, I think is an important aspect that's been really overlooked. And here I've just translated one of the past studies that looked at 3 different sites very close to each other of different periods to show changes in colour, to get a feel for this. So it's something else I would like to do. And then I've talked a lot about South Asia because it's a neighbouring region where there is still glass bangle wearing in a really culturally important way. And not to backward or side project the meanings of those onto mine, but just to use it as an ethnographic case study to think more about these things. And because certainly in South Asia, Chudra, the marriage bangles, have really important meanings to do with the the materials they're made of, the colours and what they represent, regional differences, different superstitions to do with breaking bangles, and what that might mean for your marriage, to purposely ritualistically break your bangles when you're widowed, all sorts of things, and not to talk about it here because it's just too long, but you know, I have sort of thought a bit about how these differences in different regions and different colours do exist in this neighbouring region, and what I might learn from that. So I think I've probably gone over time now, so I just really want to quickly thank my very patient and generous supervisors, Dr. Ellen Swift at Kent University, Dr. Andrew Meek at the Science Department of the British Museum, and also Dr. Sinjin Simpson, who's in the Middle East Department, and whose collection I am analysing for this. And as I mentioned, if I don't get to answer your question here, please send me your questions if you like. And also, if you are interested in knowing more about my PhD and the developments, please feel free to follow me on the below links. I upload my presentations and videos. Lovely, thank you very much. I look forward to hearing any questions you might have.